Okay, so what's up, guys? This is just a video, maybe start of a new series or something. I've been wanting to do this for a while, actually. Um, so what this actually is I'm gonna watch through this match, Rather versus AleQSantos in this case, and sort of try and analyze it. Um, I see a lot of players, in either the main SR Discord or in game, asking about, I don't understand how people go so fast. There are these people in like Platinum League that are beating me constantly, and I don't know how to deal with it. And hopefully this videos and maybe others like it in the future will be able to help a little bit with that. Um, So the main reason that I picked Rather versus AleQSantos in the Cosmonaut circuit winners top 16 is because I think it's actually a really interesting match. Even though the score is 5-0 to Rather, um, I think there's a lot of small kind of differences, I guess you would say, between AleQ's playstyle and Rather, and it mostly comes down to a common theme that Rather has an insane amount of practice um, compared to AleQSantos, and obviously both these players pretty high level. AleQSantos is a gold league. Rather is also a gold league. However, he's come from Xbox being I think the top ranked player ever on Xbox. That might be wrong. I'm not sure. Um, Either way, a very high ranked player on Xbox. Also, I've heard multiple times from loads of people that actually Xbox has a slight handicap in terms of grappling and stuff. Also, let's just pause here for a second and take a look at the bans that just occurred in front of us. What I would say is that AleQSantos may be unaware that Rather is insanely good at officials, random workshop rather. That being said, there are like random workshop do outnumber the official maps for the neutral picks, but Dance Hall is maybe not the most neutral that you could have gone to. Given this is the advice that I'd give for players who are playing against an opponent that's of a higher skill. Because I'm sure AleQSantos went into this either knowing who Rather is, or quickly after this match knowing who Rather was. And what you want to do is pick a map that requires the least skill to do well, and I think that Dance Hall isn't that one. I would say that AleQSantos probably would have a much easier time on a map like Club V, any of the officials, because Rather is less good at officials or Speed City Knights. Just based on these players' skill alone, I think that Club V or Speed City Knights was probably a better pick here. We can read through the chat and see whether Rather actually banned those or whether he didn't. Because the good play here is, if you know you're better than someone, is to ban easy maps. So it actually seems like AleQSantos banned Speed City Knights. Rather banned Club V. So it's possible that Rather was employing that strategy from the beginning, knowing that Club V is, I don't know, it's grapple heavy basically, and anyone from like silver onwards, I'm pretty sure has a good grasp of grapples at that point, and could potentially outplay you, even a top player with nerves. Because there's a lot of things that go into playing a tournament as a top player, and rather obviously has to contend with that in his mental game as well. You know, he's the expected favourite in this matchup. So if he loses, then I don't know. It affects him a lot more than it affects AleQSantos. But here we go into dance hall at least. A quick first point from Radha, an even better spawn, because now we just get to repeat it all over again. Doesn't capitalise on it quite though. So we can see here that AleQSantos is actually taking a slightly easier route than Radha was, and there you go again. Like, okay, so let's take a look at this in particular, right? This route that Radha takes, even from all the way back here, right? So you'll see that he does this small library swing here, and then takes the top route to get a little bit of boost. Not only that, but then he hits those little corners and instantly goes into the top tunnel. See, that is something that you want to practice immensely, to the point where you're hitting it, you know, 8 or 9 out of 10 times. Going from here even, just to watch it again, because this is super important. He doesn't even use the swings and he still makes it into the tunnel. So anyone that's struggling with that, maybe that's a route that you want to take. Obviously, a thing to note about that, in that this is a high level match between two gold leagues, right, is that Radha wouldn't normally have been able to hit that top slope, the top slope back here. So that slope up there, this bit, this is much slower than just drop grappling and threading the needle through this section here. But you'll notice down here that he's already boxed AleQSantos. There's no way that he's going to recover in time. So Radha has the option of going for a completely safe strat that's just going to win him a point. Not only that, but he's just recovered a bomb. The bad play here would be to overcompensate and protect himself from AleQSantos even more by using the bomb on him. Luckily that Radha doesn't do that, and he saves it for the final round. I thought that was worth going over for those that are unfamiliar. You know, that exchange there was really important. Notice there as well how both of these players have items, right? AleQSantos has a pulse and Radha has a bomb. The difference here is that if we go frame by frame, that Radha will take the top route here, and AleQSantos will take the bottom. The bottom is useless in this situation. It's completely the wrong play, because it doesn't give you that much more speed, and you're missing out on boost. You already have an item, so unless you want to burn that pulse, which you probably don't because there's a grapple section coming up, that play right there was probably the wrong one, and you'll see that Radha just went through this boost panel here and collected a little bit of boost, but it's enough to where he's almost at full. So even if he messes up this next section here, which is a little bit more tricky, he can recover pretty easily. And AleQSantos now struggling with the boost because he doesn't have enough, and it also messes up his strat here, where he hits into that little slope right there, and Radha's just too fast at that point. Didn't even need to use the bomb and wastes it at the end of the round. So if we skip forward here to the start of the next round, which is Minery. This is AleQSantos' pick. I mean, Minery here is another one that I think is probably a bad pick for AleQSantos. Maybe AleQSantos is trying to outplay Radha at his own game, but that would be an incredibly bad game plan because Radha is more skillful, more hours in the game, that sort of thing. So trying to outplay someone like Radha, really any of the top 8, top 16 players, is probably not going to work out for you. What you want to do is play to their weaknesses instead. Now, Radha is one player that, as I've said before, doesn't like officials, so potentially you should be picking officials against Rather, or at least practicing them, knowing that you're going to go against him. Obviously, AleQSantos isn't the best example in this case because tournament scheduling and stuff didn't work out. Incursio was supposed to play this match, but he couldn't make it. Nonetheless, Rather is probably going to be pretty good at Minery. That's what I would say. So, just to go back again, 1 second here. Notice how far down Rather goes in his swing compared to AleQSantos here. So AleQSantos all the way up there, and he's rushed his grapple. Let's put this into quarter speed. So Rather actually hits the bottom item panel, which I think is even maybe a little bit too high. You can get a lot more speed here if we play this. So you see this little slope here. What you can do is drop grapple and then grapple onto this ceiling here and hit against this slope. For those of you who don't know, hitting the top of a slope will give you an incredible speed boost. It's something that's, I don't know, a little bit like maybe taking advantage of the game mechanics or something like that. Either way, it's quite strange, but that would definitely be the fastest route here. You'd be sacrificing an item potentially, unless you hit it quite perfectly and went through the bottom item here and managed to grapple into the slope. That is possible too, but I think in normal cases you probably make a decision between the item and going fast here. Doesn't seem to have mattered again for Rather though, because AleQSantos grappled so high up that it doesn't actually matter. In this case, if AleQSantos had done what I said about the drop grapple into the slope, he probably would have been ahead of Rather here, forcing Rather into a situation where he'd probably want to either use the rocket or swap it out for another item, creating a much more a situation with much more pressure for Rather. Right now, Rather's doing what he does in ranked. You know, he's just running the map. Everyone will know the maps inside out at the top level. There's absolutely no pressure here being exerted by AleQSantos, apart from the fact that he has a hook. But Rather's so far ahead and random workshop map, which means that the hook really isn't a threat. It's going to be more of a hindrance to AleQSantos. So Rather trying to actually burn his rocket, like I said there, for a better item because he's in front and doesn't need the rocket this time. It was a good hook actually by AleQSantos. Right here, recognizing that he's behind, and actually hooks onto this wall climb section here, and refills his item with another hook. Not so useful now that he's in first though. That hook play is something that should have probably been avoided by a player of Rather's caliber. Sliding on walls is something that if you're not practicing, then you probably should. It's something that is pretty important, especially in competitive play, at least, I would say. So, a thing to notice here is that Rather was being a tiny bit greedy in this situation. So he goes so far ahead of AleQSantos in this boost section here that he wants to just use the rocket and get the easy point. And he probably wastes it because this would have been a much better opportunity to use a rocket. So actually this is something that's worth mentioning as well. There you go. That's exactly what I'm talking about, sliding on walls. This hook actually aims for Rather. Potentially, well, in this situation I'd say that it's probably not a burn considering there's no items readily available next, like in the near vicinity. So this is definitely aiming to pull rather off of the wall. Rather doesn't get hit by it because he's sliding on the wall. It kind of looks like he gets hit for a second, but it's mostly just the lag. So that was pretty smart there by Rather to recognize, fool me once, shame on me, shame on you, shame on someone. Who even knows, dude? Either way, he's not going to get hit by the same trick twice. So AleQSantos maybe trying to pull a fast one on Rather here doesn't work. Now that was better by AleQSantos. So you'll remember in the first round, he doesn't do a very low drop grapple. But even here, right, we're seeing that Rather is going above and beyond and going lower than AleQSantos. And as a result, is probably going to garner a 3 point. A tough mess up there, but theoretically, like, look at this distance. You've got AleQSantos in the back here. He's got nowhere to grapple, which means that he's going to have to slide, and he's going to go into these boxes, and he's going to get a little bit of boost, but it's really irrelevant. Rather has blasted through the bottom route, probably grappled here, and given himself so much speed that if he'd have played it right, he could have just won the round here. And he grapples up, which is probably a misplay on his part. What he probably should have done is hit the top slope here to get a bit of a speed boost and just slide, because you'll see AleQSantos is up here at the top, which is basically forced upon you by the map Minery, by the way. If you look at here, this gate closes, you're forced into the top section of this part. So if you go bottom here as the leader, it's a choke point in the map. So what I mean by choke point is that, like, look how close AleQSantos is to the top of the map here, and Rather doesn't even play it right. Rather goes to the top and pulls the camera up with him. So imagine what would have happened if he'd have been like flush to the floor, sliding across here, down, and then the route that he wants to take is onto this slope here. But instead of doing that, he maybe gets a little bit complacent, thinks that he's going to win the match anyway, and he doesn't play it 100% efficiently. Something that I wanted to point out as well, this item here by AleQSantos is pretty good, and something that, so in this situation, ideally you'll be holding the item button, whatever your button for item is. That's going to make it so that when you let go of the pulse, it's going to fly from your character here, and you're jumping at a diagonal angle up here. And if you let go of the item button around here before you hit the wall, it will fly all the way through this section and disrupt Rather. Now Rather has no boost, but there's a boost pad up here, and so potentially it's going to give him a little bit of trouble. In this situation, however, not only that, but Rather's just dropped a box and is expecting to hit you. What AleQSantos does here is negates both of these things by throwing the pulse out at the perfect moment and gets rid of the box, but he's not holding the item button, so the pulse doesn't go as far as it needs to go. You'll see there, it doesn't quite hit Rather. It doesn't make it very challenging for him. Now, here as well, it's worth noting that Rather wastes his item maybe a little bit too early here. The situation for him is pretty safe, but we've already seen that AleQSantos on the walls can use this golden hook here against Rather, so potentially he probably shouldn't have burnt his golden hook so quickly. But what I wanted to point out, more importantly, is that Rather now takes the bottom route to recover his item because he already has a half full boost tank. So that's something that is really important and distinguishes AleQSantos from Rather by quite a vast margin, I would say, is Rather's ability to decide what's going on with his personal like micromanagement of boost of items and of his position in the game, and he adjusts his routes in order to make sure that he's in the best position possible. AleQSantos, on the other hand, doesn't really do that, just plays the maps and tries to take the fastest route every time, which is a viable strategy if you're the fastest player in the game. But AleQSantos is not the fastest player in the game, so it's not a very good strategy. So we've got Void next. I think Void is a much better map for AleQSantos. Obviously, loser pick, so it was AleQSantos' pick again. And a little bit of lag here, but we'll try and ignore it for the sake of the analysis. Void is one of those maps that's potentially bad for Rather. Not because Rather is bad at this map, but because it's pretty easy for everyone. Another one of those maps, like I said before, Club V. Also a good one is Gift Store. So worth keeping that in mind when you have to play an opponent that you think is vastly better than you, is to maybe pick one of those maps and get good at those maps if you're not good at those maps, because consistency in those maps is what's going to make the difference and potentially give you points against top players in tournament. So AleQSantos here, a pretty smart pick. I'm pretty sure that he didn't pick it for the reason I've just said, but nonetheless, I'm pretty sure this will work out maybe a closer game. AleQSantos already has 2 points. So now notice this. You've got AleQSantos here in the back, and he's in a really good position despite being in the back. You'll see if you rewind a little bit that Rather is trying to avoid AleQSantos' fireball entirely. He wants to go to the top route, but he messes up a little bit, and he doesn't quite get it. Let's play this in half speed. And so he messes up there, and he just wants to avoid this fireball. Luckily, AleQSantos doesn't use it, but AleQSantos recognizing that it took a lot of boost here, where he was boosting down this slope. He was at full boost, and now he's at below half. So Rather here making a misplay by not following AleQSantos' route. There was no way in that circumstance that AleQSantos was going to be able to use his fireball to hit Rather. But despite that, he still took the top route. Now the top route, all the way back here, is honestly not that great. I mean, you're just seeing how really ineffective the top route in Void is in that, because Rather, he had to use the boost panel all the way back here to gain extra speed back. AleQSantos, with the smarter play, refilled on boost and was able to, from this position here, just swing all the way around and then boost into the lead instead, which is equally, if not more effective than the boost panel. Now Rather here gets a little bit lucky with ice, but uses it terribly. So that AleQSantos now, I mean, he is slower, and it did work out for Rather, but icing someone when they're just about to fall into a boost tunnel is a very bad strategy. Normally, at least. So you'll notice here now, we've got Rather with an excellent fireball here. AleQSantos now gets a fireball, and Rather plays it really, really smartly. So notice now there's pretty much nowhere that AleQSantos can go. Not only that, but Rather is about to go into a boost tunnel. There was a recent change, well, recent-ish change, that meant that boost tunnels now retain your initial speed, especially if you're then boosted down onto a slope. That gives you, in most circumstances, more speed than what you'd be able to get normally using the grapples. So this entire situation, what I wanted to say anyway, was that Rather was essentially this entire time trying to kill AleQSantos off the bottom of the screen. It doesn't work, but another benefit of this is that AleQSantos has a fireball, and if we forward a bit, he uses the fireball expecting Rather to go the normal route, and he doesn't. He goes to the top route with the boost. So a good avoidance there as well, like awareness of where your opponent is and what position your opponent's in, not only your own. Like, Rather here is not only managing his own resources, but also managing his opponent's, which is something that you get at the very top level. It's something to look out for in all, I would say, top 16, top 32, top 8 matches. You're going to see players try and take control of their opponent's resources by forcing them behind for long periods of time. Derpiculus is one of the best at this. Not only managing his own resources really well and being incredibly consistent, but also just being so consistent when blind running and front running for huge periods of time, to the point where you're just going to mess up or become so slow compared to him that he'll win by wearing you down. And this is basically what Rather did to a lesser extent right here, was he's put AleQSantos into a position that AleQSantos can't recover from. There's absolutely no possible position that AleQSantos can recover from this and get a point. Rather has won this exchange already, which is 5 seconds or so before he actually wins. So testament really to Rather's decision-making skills. What would have been the best play here for AleQSantos was to wait in this boost tunnel here and refill on boost. You can see he's quite low. But instead he tries to recover. Recognizing when your opponent has already won an exchange is something that's, I would say, only like a mid-level skill, If you can recognize when your opponent has won an exchange and there's no point in you continuing, and what would be best for you as a player to then win the actual game is to concede that round to your opponent in exchange for a better starting position next round. Now I'm noticing here that AleQSantos is potentially only using this bottom route because it's the one that he knows. What would have been best in this situation here is if AleQSantos has gone this middle route here with items. He's already got enough boost to do the strategy that I was talking about last round, where he swings up and boosts around. And even failing that, he can use the boost tunnel. It's not detrimental, even though it's a little bit slower. So the best position here, I think, would have probably been AleQSantos going middle route for one of the items. Also important to note is that if a player knows the item percentages, which there's a public spreadsheet, available on Google Docs that tells you the item percentages. That being said, it's almost a 50% chance that you get a hook in second place in a 1v1. This is worth noting to an incredible degree, because you can instantly use an item and just hope that it's going to be a hook. And in most cases, or rather the most common outcome, is that it is. So a play like this, where, you get an item and then instantly use it while Rather's on the grapple, is a better play and puts Rather in a much worse position, because in that situation, he has to react very quickly to an oncoming attack. And often cases, especially in official maps where you're moving slower in general, there's much less time to react to that sort of thing. While we're at it, if Rather was to take this middle route instead, and opt for a more aggressive play than what he did, this boost play that Rather did here is a pretty defensive play. He's looking right now to conserve his lead, and make sure that if he makes a mistake while he's front running, he can recover with boost pretty easily. Now, if he'd done something else alternatively, which is get the item there's about a 45% chance that this item results in a single box. Now, a single box is incredibly OP on a section where you're going to swing up and you're basically going straight up, right? If you box here, and AleQSantos is, well, he has a pretty small window to respond, you know. This player model is about 2 or 3 tiles thick in width-wise. And this tunnel here, I'd probably say is no more than about 18 tiles, right? So, I don't know. I feel like a box here is a pretty aggressive option, especially considering that AleQSantos, and I'm pretty confident that Rather could recognize this if he was thinking about it. AleQSantos has taken this bottom route for the boost every single time. Now that limits you to where you're going to be able to swing from because of the fact that you have to then jump and grab the swing. That being said, he's probably going to land somewhere in this second half of the swing here. So if Rather uses it on maybe the middle, just right of the middle, he's pretty good situation to possibly hit AleQSantos. Especially considering that AleQSantos' strategy here is going to be to swing up and then boost the same way that he did last round. We'll see here like he does. So yeah, I would say that is probably the difference between an aggressive and a defensive play. You'll notice here in a second AleQSantos makes a mistake and Rather wins the round. So the defensive play does work out, but I'd say for you know the sake of showing off a little bit, maybe the aggressive strat from Rather would have been pretty fun to watch. But that's really besides the point. What I wanted to get across there was the differences between an aggressive and a defensive play, and maybe the advantages and disadvantages. You know, boost being a good way to make sure that you're, even if you mess up, you'll still retain a pretty good position, and an item being a more risky one, but high risk, high reward type thing. And especially if you know the percentages, sometimes it's a calculated gamble, you know. So something that I just want to point out for the sake of, pointing out something that you can look out for in pro matches is this thing that Rather does here. Now, that little grapple forwards and then backs, or back and then forwards, is definitely intended to be a reverse grapple, which is probably the best play that Rather can do here. You see that AleQSantos has just gotten an item, and it doesn't matter in this situation what item it was. So something to try and practice if you're looking to improve is figuring out where the items are placed and when does the item that your opponent get matter. And in this case, it doesn't matter at all what item AleQSantos gets, because it's always going to be dangerous if you take the same route as AleQSantos, i.e. you swing from the bottom here and you get an item and you swing across and then up. AleQSantos in this case got a ball, so we'll talk about the case where you get a ball. So AleQSantos, we saw last round with Rather. I'll rewind a little bit to, I think, potentially here. Rather gets a ball here, and then AleQSantos follows, and every item that you get in this situation is dangerous, right? So Rather is in the lead, and then he increases his lead by throwing the ball backwards because AleQSantos has nowhere to go. He's already committed to getting the item. In that case, he misses, but if it had worked out, which I'm pretty sure he did in one of the previous rounds, he increases to his lead so far that AleQSantos had already lost the exchange. The mistake was all the way back down in this section where he chose to follow Rather. That's where he lost the round. It wasn't when he lost the round up here. So moving back to this position here, where Rather attempts a reverse grapple, it's simply to avoid the same fate as what AleQSantos would have experienced with Rather. Whereby, if you reverse grapple here, not only are you going to be all of a sudden ahead of your opponent, you'll bait them, in most cases, into using it anyway, predicting that you're just going to follow. And Rather has a bomb. So he's going to, 1, get ahead of his opponent, 2, bait AleQSantos into using his own item, and 3, be able to use the bomb while ahead to not only boost himself into the lead, but also push AleQSantos further back behind him, if the reverse grapple worked out, which it didn't. So good of Rather here to not only be able to recognize that his reverse grapple didn't actually hit, but to recover it so quickly. Even better than being consistent at a reverse grapple is being able to consistently recover from when it doesn't work, because obviously the reverse grapple is incredibly tight timing. None of the items really worked out here for Rather or AleQSantos, but that exchange there with the reverse grapple was worth noting. So here we go into Dash the Knight. Dash the Knight, another one that's potentially, I would say AleQSantos has a chance here too. Mostly because a lot of grapple sections, places that are mostly the same for all skill levels, there are maps in the random workshop, like Dance Hall, the map that they started on, that have strategies that are just very difficult unless you've trained for hours and practiced them and to get consistent. Dash the Knight isn't one of them. There's not many strategies here that you have to practice to make sure that you can go as fast as possible. So AleQSantos stands a chance here. This was a good pick by AleQSantos. Another thing that I want to mention is another example of aggressive versus defensive play, but in a different way. There are items here you can see in the bottom right of the screen. You don't have to follow where Rather or AleQSantos is going here. They're both aiming up to the top and then drop grapple down, essentially following the intended route. But what you can do is drop grapple here instead and get a little bit of speed and head for the item. Now, this is a bit of a risky play, but it will pay off in most circumstances, given that you don't get a box. Because a box means that you're going to have to be incredibly fast to beat the other player to the drop grapple, where you can disrupt their play. In pretty much every other case, when you get a ball, when you get the ice, when you get a bomb is pretty neutral, to be fair. You're not going to be able to disrupt them very much, but you're going to be able to recover pretty well. If you get a drill, then you will be able to recover. If you get a hook is pretty much best case scenario, along with ice, because both of these items are going to disrupt the player to a point where they're not going to be able to continue on the normal route. Now, as good as Rather is, I'm pretty confident that if somebody went for the item here, it's so uncommon that Rather would have to either take the top route here where you go above and grab this item, or just slide. Now, sliding is the worst thing that you can do, because you're just losing all of that speed that you were trying to get here by pulling a drop grapple down into this. So overall, this is a pretty offensive play, and it will work out, half the time. And AleQSantos here, behind 3-0 in this set. Maybe it would have been worth trying to pull a more aggressive play style against Rather, because Rather seems to be outdoing him in the defensive style. Another thing to note, and this happens all the time, is that Rather will, or players in general, will waste an item as soon as they realize that they're in front. A classic example is what happens right now, is that Rather gets a hook from the item in the top left-hand corner of this little library swing thing here, and wastes it almost immediately. He doesn't use it in an at all threatening way. Not only that, he wastes it 2 or 3 seconds before he's going to get another item. Now, in this case, AleQSantos doesn't have an item. But it doesn't matter, because if Rather messes up in any of those 3 seconds before he gets another item, he's going to be in a really bad position if AleQSantos is able to continue without making a mistake, because he's just wasted the only offensive tool that he's got. So what would have been better in this case is to have wasted it probably just before you get this item, and then going into this slope at the top here and down into the bottom one. Or you could, I suppose, grapple into this and then thread the needle so that you land in this section here. So you've wasted the item here, grabbed a new one, and slided so that you can then cut the corner really tight there. And that would be the ideal play, because not only then, the idea there is to reduce the amount of time that you go without an item. Because if you don't have an item, like AleQSantos doesn't, you're not threatening anything except a tackle. And obviously a tackle is pretty devastating, but if you're in the back and there's a lot of distance between you and your opponent, a tackle's never going to happen. So there's no reason to be afraid of it. Now Rather again does the same thing here. He's wasted an item, he doesn't have anywhere to get another item, and he's now, like, he's won the round, right? But now he doesn't have a hook. If he had a hook here, this start would be very different, other than, you know, players here are probably just going to run and grapple. Yeah, pretty standard, right? This grapple section here is prime, especially when you're going slow, is prime space for using a golden hook, because you know that your opponent wants to hook onto this ceiling because it's the fastest way of moving around. So there's no way that what your opponent is thinking is something along the lines of, I'm just going to run here, because that's just slow, and that's not what your opponent's going to be thinking, because they want to win. So using that knowledge, you can be pretty confident in the fact that you can use your golden hook at any point along here before your opponent starts gaining speed to disrupt their play. Now, the ideal thing to do would be to use a hook probably around here, because what Rather wants to do right now is turn around, and turning around while also being hooked is pretty impossible. You can maintain speed in the same direction pretty easily while trying to be hooked. But turning around, that puts you in a position where you have to grapple at some point, because otherwise you're going to lose all the speed. And that's the point where you want to use a golden hook. So yeah, despite that, Rather has not used the hook in this position because he's wasted it 5 seconds earlier. So a pretty big misplay there. If Rather was against an opponent, say Benson or Meepibat or Derpiculus, you know, the top 3 in the tournament, that would have been a huge misplay, and it would have come back to bite Rather pretty hard. But obviously, AleQSantos doesn't have an item here, and is not going to get one for a pretty long time here, because Rather's preventing him. So let's talk about this, right? Because both players go for a hook in this position. There's absolutely no reason to use a hook here, apart from the fact that you've already given up on the game and you want to have some fun. And that's not a great thing to do when you're at the very beginning of the game. If you're like 2-0 down in rounds and you're about to lose, then maybe having a bit of fun will reset your mental state and be like, you know, this guy's not a monster. That being said, AleQSantos here just pulls Rather towards him while completely halting his own speed. The only reason that you would ever want to do that is so that you could then proceed to tackle them. But it's such a risky strategy that it's just not worth it ever. So if you're watching, you know, the regular video, or you're watching this video and you're thinking that that's a pretty, it's meta, and it's going to work out really well because it disrupts what Rather was thinking. It just won't. Like there's a period here of about a second or two where Rather can reset and figure out what's just happened, and he has. He's recovered and now he's in the front, where before he was in the back. He was in the back pretty significantly, and Rather uses the hook because it benefits Rather. AleQSantos dodges and for some reason uses the hook against Rather, which is ridiculous. It works the same for Rather because Rather got what he wanted. He's come back to the front. Also, in some cases, this is even a good play for Rather because, as you can see, AleQSantos is now caught in the boost tunnel. He's at the end of the boost tunnel for the boost that pushes you to the right. What is about here, I'd say that it starts probably around here, is a boost that boosts you to the top right. So it's going to go up and right. What Rather probably wanted was to grapple while AleQSantos was in this part where it's going to boost you up and right, because in that situation it's going to boost him all the way around and halt his momentum here. So Rather can pull all the way around and get in front later on, while maintaining top speed, and probably get around for it because AleQSantos is just going so unbelievably slow in that situation where he's been halted up here that there's no way to recover. There's no grapple pads up here apart from just that tiny one here, so that there's no way that AleQSantos would be able to recover that. So that was a good idea from Rather, but a terrible one from AleQSantos. Now here it's worth noting that AleQSantos doesn't do any of the offensive or defensive play. The defensive play is what Rather does. You'll watch here, he'll go up and he'll gain speed. So now he's played defensive, he doesn't have an item, but he's also intending to overtake you and then play defensive from there. So it's a positional play. Rather doesn't like being behind and he wants to get in front. So he does that. AleQSantos probably should have countered, and he probably had the right idea here. Maybe it was just a misplay, like on mechanical skill or something, where he should have definitely gotten an item there. Because, like I said before, there's a 45% chance that you get a box there, and a box would have been incredibly useful. Now, luckily, he gets a tackle here, which you can see because Rather just stops all speed for no reason. Even though AleQSantos was way in the front, it's probably a ping issue. You can see there that he tackles, and we'll go in slow motion just so you can see it a little bit clearer, is just after this next grapple, he'll slide, and then nothing happens. Rather just drops to the floor and resets his speed. So that was definitely a tackle. Now, like I was saying before in the Void match, or one of the previous matches anyway, is that you don't want to overcompensate when you've won something like that. What you want to do is recognize an exchange and then understand that you can capitalize on it. AleQSantos now has just used his Ice Beam. There was no need whatsoever to do that. And not only that, he's gone for boost instead. So under no circumstances did he really need to do that. He's gotten a box, but I would say in this section an ice is much more useful. So really, he's squandered the opportunity to snowball his lead. He's tied up the match 1 round to 1 round, and he now has a box and the same amount of boost as Rather, which means that he's not in an advantage state, because unless he uses all of his boost and sacrifices his entire defensive option to try and get this box off on Rather, there's no way that he's gonna benefit from that. Having said that, using an Ice Beam in this section coming up is incredibly useful, because as you'll see in the map later on, 5 seconds from now, is that if you Ice Beam someone here, there's a huge amount of space where unless your opponent has calculated so precisely that they're going to get hit by their ice, and their trajectory is much more like they're only going to hit this box here, then they're going to hit one of these boxes and drop, and they're going to hit this and drop, or they're going to hit this part here and drop. Neither of those are recoverable for Rather if AleQSantos had an ice. So I'm just trying to highlight here the magnitude of something that seems almost irrelevant in the moment is something that's pretty heavily important down the line. And being able to recognize that is one of the hallmarks of being an incredibly proficient item player. Obviously, in the moment, anyone can analyze this at a later date and be like, "Oh, that was probably bad." But being able to recognize it in the moment, and that's something that really makes you a good player. So, taking a look at this here is just an interesting bomb usage from Rather. I mean, we'll go in slow-mo because it's pretty hard to, it's like a tiny exchange. So we'll see that Rather in this situation, he uses the bomb like pretty immediately after he jumps. Right here. Now, this might seem insignificant, and it's, you know, it's just a bomb usage. He's trying to stop AleQSantos from getting the boost. But not only that, it also has a secondary effect of, if AleQSantos uses his rocket, then not only is Rather going to be able to explode his bomb immediately, but then that rocket's blast radius is also going to hit AleQSantos and backfire on him, sending him all the way back down the tunnel. Not only that, he's only got just over half boost, and Rather now has full boost. So given that situation occurs and Rather doesn't use any boost, he has the game, pretty much. He's just won the game with this exchange. If AleQSantos takes the bait and uses the rocket and gets, well, I guess you would say antsy for the hit, you know. In this situation, it doesn't happen though, and AleQSantos just has to use a lot of boost, which he instantly recovers. He just doesn't play it quite right in the mechanics, and misses the slope here, misses basically any opportunity that he was going to have to recover. Rather's in a really good position because all he's going to do now is grapple to this and then win the round. Instead of doing anything regular and smart, like getting an item for the next round, he instead takes the slow route in this situation and is constantly defensive. You'll notice with Rather's play, even against someone like AleQSantos, is that Rather isn't opting for items pretty much ever. If there's a situation where Rather can maintain his speed instead of slowing down a bit and getting an item, he'll maintain the speed, and that's just like a trademark of Rather's style and of a lot of other players as well. So normally you'll get two types of players. Players that will always do this fast strat that Rather's just done, you know, up here, down, and then snowballs the speed, right? Or you'll get players that will just always want the item, and they'll drop grapple here, and they'll fly along here and get the item. Rather, in this case, should be able to adapt his style to what is needed in that moment. And what's needed in that moment is an item, so that he starts in a better position next round. AleQSantos has an item and about an equal amount of boost, which puts AleQSantos at a slight advantage, especially because it's a rocket. With that being said, Rather wins this round anyway, but it's really just a case of, because AleQSantos didn't opt for the fast way of moving in this situation, you know, he insists on doing this strat where you fly up and then back down again, that he just lost the round. He was unable to adapt to what was happening in the situation, which takes practice, don't get me wrong, but it was definitely something that was required in that situation, and it just didn't happen. Now, interesting by Radha here, straight after this, is that he follows this up with getting the boost. Now, I'd be inclined to say in this case it's just because Radha's lost interest and isn't playing seriously anymore. At this point, he's noticed that AleQSantos is doing the same thing over and over again and isn't too worried about mixing AleQSantos mixing Radha up. And that's something that gets people pretty heavily in tournament. You'll snowball this effect in your head. There's nothing I can do. I've just lost. This guy's just better than me. And in most cases, it's just because you haven't taken a step back. And a perfect time to do that is in the middle of when you're trying to pick a map, or when your opponent's trying to pick a map. You should reflect on what was happening in the previous match, and figure out what at least one thing that you were doing wrong that your opponent was catching out and doing better than you. Because in every single case, your opponent was definitely doing something better than you if they won the match. At least one thing. Now, in this case, Radha is so confident in his ability to be consistent and just run the map easily that he hasn't bothered with this normal route that AleQSantos is taking. He didn't need the boost that much because he could have just snowballed it down in this section here with the library swing. But he takes the slopes anyway. And it seems at this point that he's just being pretty lazy with items too. And you'll notice with his grapples even that these grapples are not ideal. He's swinging all the way up and drop grappling every time, and that's not an ideal way to play the game to get the most speed. But it's just because he's sort of taunting AleQSantos, which, although is pretty slimy strategy, it works to keep AleQSantos in a mindset where Radha is just better, and that mindset is incredibly unhealthy for a tournament mentality, and Radha probably knows that, because it happens all the time. So doing it is just going to make AleQSantos either angry or sad, and it's going to play on his emotions and ruin his decision-making skills. So any good decisions that AleQSantos was making, and there were a few, are more likely to be bad decisions by continuing to do this for a long period of time. Now, Radha here even taking slow routes. Normally, and I'm sure you probably noticed at the start of the game here, he was taking this top route where you hit against this slope here about in the middle, and you'll hit this slope, and that is faster in most cases. But now Radha's basically on autopilot and trying to have a little bit of fun, and puts AleQSantos, that entire match really was dedicated to putting AleQSantos in a bad frame of mind, which shouldn't be underrated, to be fair. It's pretty important, I would say, because obviously mental state is one of the biggest things in keeping calm in intense situations. And you'll see that it's worked out. AleQSantos is in this mind frame where it's too good for me, is what he says after that match. He's convinced that he's lost already, and it's down to Radha being more consistent and showing off a bit in that last game, when really all that AleQSantos needs to do is become at least a little bit more consistent at the strats that he's capable of, and opt for aggressive item strategies more often to put pressure on Radha, because items will force a dodge out of your opponent, and it takes a toll eventually, whereby if you're constantly dodging items, you're no longer thinking about how to go the fastest, you're always thinking about what your opponent is going to do next. And at that point, it's worth changing your strategy so that you're doing exactly what Rather does, where you're going as fast as possible all the time, because it's all about mixing strategies together, talking to any good player will be able to tell you that what you need to do is outplay your opponent, and that's part of it. So we're here in genetics now. For the fourth game, AleQSantos versus Rather, and I'll quickly comment on the fact that I think this is an incredibly good map for AleQSantos, because it's just a game of being consistent at easy things. And like I said at the beginning of this video, if you're consistent at easy things, then all you have to do is be more consistent at the easy things than your opponent. And it's the least flashy way you could play, but it's effective, right? If you pick Gift Store, if you pick Genetics, if you pick Club V, then all you're doing is being consistent at easy things. And what's going to make the difference in those games is your ability to use items. And Rather has shown in the first 4 matches of this set that he's not fond of item strategies. So this pick here is something that's pretty good for AleQSantos. Having said that, if we rewind 5 seconds, then we'll see here that AleQSantos actually makes a mistake, and this is something that's just incredibly bad, and it's an awful habit that none of you should get into. Is something where so AleQSantos has just hit off of this slope, and he's bounced backwards because he's hit it at the wrong angle. Now, instead of trying to recover and grappling this way and trying to gain speed back again, he's going to try and do something really stupid, where he's landed on the floor, first of all. So he's hit the wall, he's missed the grapple, and he's landed on the floor. Awful strategy. Not only that, he's tried to hook Rather, so he's wasted his only offensive option. Look at how much time Rather has to react. We go from... Where are we? So he hits the wall at 19. 15, 19. He then uses the hook at 20. That's a whole second that Rather has to react. Not only that, but it's only a danger at 21-ish. So that's a whole 2 seconds that Rather has to just slide, because that's all he has to do. Not only that, there's a million places that you can just slide on this map. Hooks are very bad on fast random workshop maps. And AleQSantos is just trying to use a low-level strategy to catch Rather out, and it's not going to work. Something that I would say to not do against all high-level players is to use cheap strategies like what you've just seen. Hooks after you mess up, boxes after you mess up, anything really after you mess up as a way of trying to recover. Using items to recover in general is an incredibly poor strategy, and I might go into that in another video as to just why that's poor. But the gist is that you lose all offensive capability as a player, and you give all of the power to your opponent, which is bad. It's just bad. There's no other way of saying it. So another thing to point out, and it's just quickly to praise the recognition that on AleQSantos' part that he has full boost and he doesn't need any more, and to go instead for the items is something that Rather didn't do. And I think it's just because he's on autopilot, like I said last game. He's just, Rather has even more boost than AleQSantos, and yet he still goes for the boost panel anyway. AleQSantos here, increasing his favourability in the match, gets tackled but it doesn't really matter. And here in this game is something important to note, is proficiency with item use. So you'll see that Rather here can use items at pretty much any point he wants. Now, obviously, he failed a little bit there on mechanical part, because he was trying to do something and he wasn't really ready for his own brain to make the decision by the looks of it. But AleQSantos is trying, at least, to play smartly in most cases. That being said, he's not able, or he's not proficient enough to use items in every situation. He has to use items at a specific place, and it's on that side on the far right at the beginning of the match. Whereas Rather can use wherever he wants, so it's an incredible disadvantage to not be able to hit the item key at the same time as you're grappling and jumping. So definitely that's something to practice, and being in Gold League is about where you would want to try and learn that, because what you'd want to learn this as quickly as possible, because if people in Gold can't do this, then you're just going to skyrocket in points after you can use items at this part in genetics or in any other part except the far right. You're going to catch your opponents in silver, in bronze, anywhere below that, even in gold, you're going to catch opponents out, and platinum to some extent, to be fair, if you're using items all the way through a map. So you'll see AleQSantos here again. He'll just use the pulse. That wasn't even close. It wasn't even close to Rather. He gets the pulse, and he just uses it in the hopes that he'll maybe get something from it. And hoping with items is a really bad strategy. You'll hear players all the time complain about people who just spam items, and that's a pretty good example of bad spam. But nobody will ever complain about this because it's not hitting them. So it's plain bad. There's nothing here that's gonna defeat Rather. Rather has full boost, which you would in genetics because you're never going to need to use boost the entire rest of the map. So a pulse here where you can just boost through it anyway is almost as bad as you can get. A pulse on any other part of the stage though, where there's just full of grapples, is just an incredibly good use. Pulses are so overpowered on this map, and AleQSantos is scraping the surface here. Not even scraping the surface. So there's nothing much to say here really. So I'll talk while these players are both taking the routes. But you'll notice that there's literally nothing that either of these players can do to change or to try and outplay one another. The only way that you're ever going to win really is by making a mistake or waiting for your opponent to make a mistake. That's the only way you'll either win or lose. And you'll notice that a lot of these games, these rounds, go to sudden death. And like I said, it's the case before where you pick a map that it doesn't matter what rank you're in, because as long as you're consistent, there's no way for a better opponent than you to get a point or get a lead. Rather here is tied with AleQSantos, despite the fact that Rather is much more proficient with items and with mechanical skill in general. It doesn't matter in this case, for a long time at least, because both of these players can do the same strategies as one another. So it's another case of being on last point, and there really being nothing that Rather can do to change that, apart from play it really safe, which luckily is something that Rather is pretty good at. But he's in the mind frame right now that AleQSantos is not a threat, which is a bad mindset for any top player to be in, really, is to be too cocky, because at any moment you're going to get a map picked against you, like genetics, like Club V, and you're just going to lose. Rather's made a mistake there because he was so antsy for the kill because he just got bored, and it's really a testament to Rather's bad mindset in this match in particular that's given AleQSantos the win. Not to take anything away from AleQSantos, obviously incredibly consistent in that match as well. Able to have consistency that parallels rather. But that mindset is something that's affecting rather. And he got lazy, and I'm sure about halfway through that match where they were tied at 2-2, rather realised, oh wait, he might take a game. And he got quite nervous and then started making mistakes. You could see, when Rather made that mistake back here even. So we've got this. He's trying to bomb AleQSantos the entire time, and then he hits the slope, and he almost dies for it, because he's rushing the win. The bomb placement wasn't that good, but he spent so much so much like brain power timing it that he wasn't concentrating on where he was going exactly, and then he made a mistake for it. And either way, it results in AleQSantos taking the game there. And I imagine that in this next game in Speed City Nights, Rather will probably take the game a lot more seriously again, because he fell into a slump of not playing properly. Now, what I want to say about this is that AleQSantos is in a really strong position. He's got a bomb, he's got some boost, and he's got Rather behind him. There are spikes not only here, but also just ahead of him as well. At any point here, AleQSantos could double tap the item button as quickly as humanly possible to pop Rather into either the bottom spikes or the top spikes here and get a quick round. At this point, AleQSantos should be able to recognise that he's made Rather nervous by winning that previous game. He said in the chat, his hands are sweaty. That means that he's going to be incredibly inconsistent for the near future until he gains his confidence back and gets a few rounds. What AleQSantos should have done here is made a really aggressive play to scare Rather. And in this situation, if AleQSantos had got a quick round with the bomb, then he probably would have had enough time to go from that happening to being able to refresh his item here before Rather dies for the next round. Now, that would be pretty detrimental to Rather, given that he only has a ball. Now, a ball in this situation, if Rather had have died and they'd have respawned, maybe could have done some damage, but obviously there's a timer. There's a timer that is 1 or 2 seconds after the round starts. You can't use items for. That gives you enough time as AleQSantos to get significantly ahead so that it's not a threat anymore. Not only that, if you'd have gotten an item, if you got a ball, if you got an ice, you could potentially counter what Rather was doing and make him a little bit more careful. If you'd gotten a ball, you could just throw it back at him so that it mitigates the entire effect that Rather was going for in the first place. Or if you had a bomb, you could reflect it back at him, or a pulse. There's a lot of items here that you could have gotten if you'd have gone for an aggressive play. It was a pretty safe aggressive play is what I'm trying to say. Now, a mistake here from Rather is interesting to note here. AleQSantos uses the bomb to open the gate, which, fair enough. It's a play. It's probably suboptimal, but in this case, pretty good. Rather doesn't take note of the fact that the switch has been flicked, and opts to go for the gate to try and open the bottom route. It doesn't work in this case because the gate 3 has already been opened. So AleQSantos gains a huge lead because Rather doesn't expect it. He jumps right for the corner and slows down. And in this case, AleQSantos takes the round. I would say that's probably down to the nerves due to last game. It took a while, but AleQSantos now capitalizing on his victory from last game and trying to snowball it a little bit. A rocket here, a pretty awful item to have in this section though. There's not a lot of places that you can use it. Also, you have to be aware that Rather has a fireball. See, what's interesting there is that it's almost as if Rather is trying to gain back his own confidence by calling out what AleQSantos was going to do. And it probably works. So AleQSantos here has taken the bottom route and Rather sits on the boost panel. He just sits here and uses the ball, expecting AleQSantos to go the top route. This is such a bad play under normal circumstances, but it was pretty good, all things considered, given that the confidence boost that it would give Rather and ease the nerves a little bit. There are a lot of things at work here mentally, whereby Rather is going to hit this ball, he's going to chuckle to himself, and then regain confidence in his own ability to read what AleQSantos is going to do. And then he goes on to win the game. AleQSantos, on the other hand, he just laughs it off, which is pretty much as good as you can do in a situation like this where you're just being read. The ball's going to make direct connection and you're going to fall over. And that's what's going to happen. But you can recover, as AleQSantos does recover. But Rather's going to gain a huge lead. Or at least he would if Speed City Knights was good with checkpoints. Having said that, you can literally see the confidence, well, we've essentially gone back to the beginning of genetics, right? Where Rather doesn't care anymore. He's realised that actually what he was thinking before was pretty stupid and that he's always going to win this match, and he's just upset a little bit about dropping a game. Interestingly there, AleQSantos has returned the goofiness of that play from Rather by trying to hook Rather into the spikes. It does not work at all. The only reason it didn't work is because AleQSantos used it too early. What you would want to do here is the right idea from AleQSantos, is instead of using the hook here-ish, you probably want to use the hook just as you're dropping down, because in that case, you're just going to drag your opponent towards you and you're going to be stuck against this wall. So you're going to be dragging your opponent like this down, which is going to coincide with the spikes eventually, and you're going to win the round. It's a pretty good strategy, and not only that, it's a pretty tilting strategy too, because you've been hooked by something that really shouldn't have hit you. You should be sliding in this situation anyway, and you're not. So there's a lot of things that go wrong on your part there if you get hooked and you get hit by that. And like I said, yeah, pretty tilting, to say the least. You're seeing taunts here come out from Rather, because like I say, he's regained the confidence. He's no longer in shock that he's lost a round to a God League, and he's probably gonna make a few suboptimal plays and still win the round. And it's because AleQSantos is now again in the mindset Rather is just too good. Yeah, AleQSantos here makes a mistake. He bounces off of the slope up here, because what happens is if we go frame by frame, he'll actually slide up this gate and bounce backwards. We'll just show you that in 0.5 speed because it's really not that important. You see, for a few frames there, if we pause, he's sliding, right? And then he just hits backwards, because that's what happens when you hit slopes on the wrong way, for some reason. And then AleQSantos is sad because he's lost the round and he didn't do anything wrong, he just slightly misspaced his jump. And then Rather takes the round. It's pretty free, basically. It's unforced error. It's something that everyone really, as players, should be avoiding, is being able to be consistent. You know, that's a 2 or 3 tile wide slope. Your character's only 4 tiles high. That's pretty easy. So obviously in this case, Rather takes the round, and then obviously also the game. That's really all that can be said. You know, no disrespect to any of these players. Obviously, I'm only pointing out the flaws and mistakes, and also the bits that these players do well. If you're interested in where I found this tournament, I'm part of the Velocity team, and the Cosmonaut circuit was a tournament that happened probably approaching 2 weeks ago by the time this video comes out. And if you want to view any of the raw footage, they're all commentated, and it's just the matches as they were live. There's no cuts. There's no anything. It's raw footage, but it's all you would need from a competitive video, really. So I'd suggest checking out Velocity tournaments for that. Not only that, but I'd also suggest Comments channel as well, because this has the Speedrunners Winter Elo tournament, which is another great place where you can find competitive gameplay. You've got people like Depiculus, Calimania, which is someone who didn't enter the Cosmonaut circuit but an incredibly good player anyway. You've got me, I play in this one. Benson, Incursio. Incursio doesn't appear in the Cosmonaut circuit either, he had to drop out. Just a great place to find up to date. You know, this was released in February, tournament gameplay, and I mean, really, all you would need to do is visit the Velocity Tournaments YouTube channel, and I've got pretty much everyone who uploads relatively frequently speedrunners content linked on the featured channel tab. So if you're looking for any more content, then that's where you should go. Let me know whether you enjoyed this sort of commentary analysis type of thing. I figured that I at least wanted to do Rather versus AleQSantos because it's a really good example of what the differences are between someone who's really experienced and is a top player versus someone who's less experienced, but also has a lot of the mechanics. And so I just wanted to highlight there the differences and what sort of happens and what the differences are between someone like Rather and someone like AleQSantos.